journals can be a place in grief where nothing has to make sense. Everything is allowed, which is my favorite part. And it just kind of like people putting their initials on trees or attaching locks to bridges. It's like I was here. I was working through something. I was working out something. I was living through something. And that is really significant and really um, affirming and grounding and kind of rooting you back into the earth when you're grieving. Hi there, and welcome back to Grief Grower, my dear grief growers. I am so delighted to be here with you today, as always. If you have been growing alongside me in my work for a while, welcome back. If you're new to me and my work, hello. My name is Shelby Forsythia. I am a grief coach, two-time author, and the founder of Life After Loss Academy. And over the years since I've been doing this work, I have had the joy and the honor of helping thousands of grieving people through my books, through my podcasts, through my online courses, stop feeling stuck in grief and build lives that they genuinely love from the lives that loss forced them to live. And when I say loss, I don't just mean death-related loss, because I think people think grief and they think death, and that is true. But we can also grieve so many other things in our lives. And so all the work that I do also honors divorces, breakups, major diagnoses, geographic moves, job losses, and any other major loss that changes your life. And here on this show, if you're new to this work, we believe that grief is not something to get over. It is something that we grow with and alongside for the rest of our lives. And when we stop treating grief like a problem to be solved or an illness to be treated, and more like an invitation to live more deeply, we can really build these rich and cohesive lives that are meaningful to us or purposeful to us. Again, build lives that we genuinely love, even from the lives that loss forced us to live. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite topics, which is writing for grief, journaling about grief. This is something I did after my mother's death in 2013, although it took me a little bit of time to feel like I could write again. I know reading is hard for a lot of grieving people. Writing was hard for me as well. And figuring out what to write is often a dilemma for grieving people. So this is sort of like a listicle episode where I'm going to give you in order 7 different journaling prompts that you can use if you are wanting to journal about your grief or your loss, but you don't know where to start. You don't know what to write. You're like, I've got a journal, I've got the book, but it is blank, or I'm journaling online or maybe even on my phone, and there's this cursor that's just doing the blinking, and I have no idea what to put in that space. And I think there's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves when we're grieving to put words around our experience, to say something profound. So I really hope that these prompts will be useful to you, because there's something that is uniquely haunting about staring at a blank page when you're grieving. It's not just that there often are not words for grief. Grief is often described as a wordless experience. It's the pressure to like explain what's happening in here through here, and with nothing but a pen and a piece of paper. And they seem like these little teeny tiny tools in the face of something as big and as monstrous and as overwhelming as grief. This was my experience, and see if this sounds like you. You're sitting down to write, hoping that journaling about what you're feeling might help, and trusting all of this online advice, including some of my own, that says writing's good for you when you're grieving. But you look at the page and you've got your pen in your hand and your brain goes kind of fuzzy and your heart aches because you really, really want to do this, but you don't know where to begin, and so you don't end up writing anything. The page stays empty. And then, if you're anything like me, there's this voice of shame that comes in too that says, why can't I even do this? This feels like so little in the face of grief. Why can't I even do this? And if you feel like the blank page is something you're fighting or coming up against, this reframe might be helpful to you. It is something that I gradually sort of adopted in the wake of my mother's death, and that is the blank page is not here to shame you. It is an invitation or a doorway or a space to like spread out. One of my favorite podcast maintenance phase often refers to spreading out in the living room of their show. Of an empty podcast and open mic as the ability to have a space to spread out. And you can see your grief journal as the same thing. It's a space to say what's on your heart without having to be poetic or without having to be coherent. You don't have to know exactly what to write. And in this space, spreading out in the living room of your grief journal, you just have to be willing to try or to exist, to sit in there and to take up space. And again, whether you're grieving somebody who died, or a relationship that ended, or a diagnosis that changed your life, or a version of yourself, or a version of a life that you thought you would be in right now, these are all really good, gentle prompts that help you meet the page with compassion. Again, these are not prompts that are about losing someone to death, specifically the death of a loved one. They are prompts that are universal fits for whatever grief you're facing, no matter how long ago the loss happened or what type of loss you're facing. Number one of my all-time favorites, right now, grief feels like. Insert your thoughts here. This is a helpful prompt because grief is weird and shape-shifting and strange, and a lot of people describe grief as kind of this nebulous blob that is shifting and changing moment by moment, day to day, sometimes even hour by hour. And so putting words to, as best you can, how grief is showing up right now in this moment can be really, really helpful for defining exactly what it is that you're experiencing right now. And so you could describe grief maybe as a fog or a weight or a storm or a giant or maybe a very, very subtle whisper. I often describe my grief as a record player, something that tells the same story over and over again in the background. In Life After Loss Academy, my students and I talk about our own record players of just grief telling the truth all the time. And so grief is a record player that constantly plays in the background. My mom is dead, my mom is dead, my mom is dead, my mom is dead. And if you've experienced multiple losses, as many of us have, we have many record players going in the background. And these record players aren't necessarily threatening. They're not necessarily getting closer or louder. They're just playing the truth over and over and over again. Some days that's exhausting. Some days that reminds me of the preciousness of what I'm living right now. And some days it's just really easy to tune out and ignore. It changes day by day, but starting to recognize grief as different objects or different animals or different people or different presences in my life has helped me through the years define exactly what I'm talking about when I'm talking about grief in any given moment. And readers of my first book, Permission to Grieve, will remember that I referred to my grief as a wolf trapped down in the basement. And this came forward for me while journaling because I was really, for the first 2 years after my mother's death, trying to ignore the fact that I was grieving. I thought that I bought into society's belief that if you push it down or away for long enough, it'll go away and it won't feel so big or bad anymore. And then the flip side of that is if I let this wolf out of the basement, it could kill me or I'll go crazy. That's exactly what I was telling myself, is this grief is so big and so bad and so all-consuming that I don't know who I'll be on the other side of feeling it. And so it's much safer for me to keep this wolf of grief trapped down in the basement. And by journaling about it, feeling that way, and picturing it that way in my brain, I was able to come up with even more metaphors. For example, hearing grief howling at night. The only time that I would really engage with my grief was before I would go to sleep. I would not really think about it or engage with it or let myself feel it during the day. And slowly but surely, I had these experiences with my grief where I felt not safer, because I don't think we can ever necessarily feel safe in the presence of grief, but more comfortable, allowing grief to rush forward. And again, as I tell the story in Permission to Grieve, there was a day when I was working downtown and someone stole my wallet. And that was the day that broke down the door, that tore down the floodgates. Everything that I was holding up against grief came down in an instant because something that was so precious to me had been taken. Just like in my mother's death, something so precious and crucial to my life had been taken. And it was really the first day I gave myself permission to grieve, which turned out to be the title of the book. And in that moment, it was as if the wolf had been set free from the basement, and it didn't devour me, and I didn't go crazy, and I didn't die, which I thought was a very real possibility of feeling the experience of grief. What ended up happening is I gave myself permission to grieve. I wailed and I sobbed, and I essentially threw a tantrum about everything that I'd lost. My mom's death had happened 2 years prior to that, so I was stuffing this wolf down for quite a long time. And by letting it forward, it was the first time I really felt all the way connected to myself again. But I would not have had language for that, and I certainly would have not turned it into a book. I'm not saying you need to write a book, but I certainly wouldn't have turned it into a book if I had not had this metaphor experience or this answer to the question, right now my grief feels like. So that's a really wonderful place to start off. Whether you think your grief is a living thing or a storm, something that comes and goes, something that's kind of playing in the background, something that's an inanimate object, you get to choose. You get to decide, or you can let your grief speak, which leads us into the second prompt here. Number 2, if my grief could talk, it would say, insert things here. And here's why this is helpful, because while grief is a part of you, grief exists in your world, it also has its own voice. It is also separate from you. It is an element of you. You are not all grief. You are yourself, and grief is a large component of who you are in the world. But by allowing grief to talk to you, it puts like this little inch of separation between you and your grief. It opens up room for conversation, whereas previously, as a lot of my students and clients will say, it feels like grief has swallowed them or is overtaking them, or as if they are just swamped by the energy of grief. And this is something we do in Life After Loss Academy, where we picture grief as a living thing, and then we talk to it. And this prompt invites you to give grief a chance to say what it needs to say without interruption, and if you can, without judgment. And it may surprise you with what it has to say. It might show up as a protector. It might show up as a truth teller. It might show up as a comforter or someone who wants to remember things with you, or a teacher. Grief can show up in a lot of different formats, or it may show up as a creature in pain that just wants your attention, that just wants to be seen. This is true for so many grieving people whose stories I've seen shared online, and it's just another way of allowing grief to show itself to you in a season maybe when it's hard to see, or the only way you know to interact is to silence it or push it away. And that's not your fault. That's something that society teaches us to do, is to push grief down and away. But something that we can do to begin growing with it and encouraging ourselves to be in existence alongside grief is allowing it to inhabit its full voice. If my grief could talk, it would say. Okay, number 3, if these first 2 prompts don't resonate with you, you don't really want to humanize grief yet or make grief a living thing that can talk or has a form or a shape, that's totally fine. Number 3 is probably your best bet. It is, I miss the version of me who, ... And this is helpful because especially when we're grieving, loss doesn't just change the external circumstances of our life, although it certainly does that. Loss also changes how we perceive ourselves and how other people perceive us, aka like the building blocks of our identity. So when you wake up in the morning, when you look in the mirror, before you go to sleep at night, whatever the circumstances may be, you might not recognize the person that you are now. Or even if you do, you may not like that person, and you might be grieving an old version of yourself that loss took away, that loss rendered untrue or invalid. You are no longer a caregiver. You are no longer creative. You are no longer focused. You are no longer motivated. You are no longer insert what you are no longer here. You are no longer a married person. You are no longer a healthy person. You are no longer a person who lives in X zip code or X postal code in the world. The circumstances of your life have changed, and the identities that are tied to those things are things that are also worth grieving. This showed up in my own life, and I always give this example, and I think to a lot of people it seems very small, but after my mother's death in 2013, I was in college, and I slept late and hard and often after her death. My body was like walloped by the weight of her grief, and I had been a mourning person for my entire life before my mother's death. And my mom would even tell stories of me as a tiny baby waking up in the morning and singing to myself in my crib until someone came to get me because I was such a morning creature. It was like hardwired into my body, into my soul, into my spirit, as if the sun's awake, so am I, and I am happy to be here. I'm happy to be alive. And after my mother's death, I missed sunrises. I missed morning alarms. I missed classes. I missed so many things, and I felt disconnected from this identity of a morning person that made me who I was. To a lot of people, this would be very small, but to me, this was extraordinarily big. And journaling about grieving my identity as a morning person helped me recognize that this was another part of losing my mom that I also had to mourn. And gradually, I started to develop rituals for saying goodbye, even temporarily, to my identity as a morning person. For now, I'm releasing this identity. For the time being, in this season, I am letting go my identity as a morning person, and I seriously grieved that. There are elements of ourselves that feel so core to who we are, and loss just takes that along with everything else it's taken too. And so this prompt of I miss the version of myself who is a really powerful open door to all the other things you're grieving that you may not have actually named yet. And I'll tell you this too, because if this is the prompt you're starting with, please, a little asterisk, take caution here. This might bring up feelings that feel too big for you to deal with as one single person. So I encourage you, as you're creating this list, to seek out support, whether you find it in Life After Loss Academy. We devote a whole module, Module 2, Release, to grieving the person we used to be and the hopes, dreams, and expectations we used to hold. We spend a lot of time on this, or working with a therapist or other spiritual teacher in your community that can support and guide you through this, because oftentimes the identities that we hold and the things that build up the blocks of who we perceive of ourselves to be in the world are very, very great. And losing them, in addition to the primary loss or the big loss that we have, can feel kind of like a double or a triple whammy of devastation. And that's hard to do all by yourself. And so I would encourage you not to, especially if this is the journaling prompt that you think or feel is like pinging the most loudly in your soul. It's like, that's the thing I want to dive into. Take a little care, take a little caution, and if you can, reach out for support as you're doing this as well, whether it's from me or from anybody else in your community or grief world that can walk alongside you in this. Any grief professional worth their salt will know that you don't just grieve the primary loss, the big thing that happened, the one that society can see. You also grieve tens or hundreds or maybe even thousands of secondary losses underneath it, including the loss of identity. I'll tell you what, that's not a blank page anymore after you start that list. Okay, number 4. The thing no one sees is ... And here's why this specific prompt is helpful. Grief is really isolating. We were just talking about getting support because a lot of times in life after loss, things fall away, but especially when the world keeps spinning and time has gone on, people tend to assume that, well, they must be better now. When I did a podcast interview with Rob Bell in 2019, I spoke about I was upright, I was standing up, and so people thought I was okay after my mother's death, and it took about 2 to 3 years after her loss to really start engaging with my grief. I was not okay. I looked fine. I had the presentation of fineness, but it was very much a facade. It was very not real. And something that is really helpful when you're staring at a blank page is to start by what is no one seeing? What is no one acknowledging? And the questions I kind of tack onto this one is like bonus questions, part A, B, and C, is what do you wish other people could immediately understand about your grief? What do you wish that people could just see you and just bam, know on sight that this is a part of your life or a part of your history or a thing that you're dealing with right now? And said another way, if you could wear a shirt that had a slogan or a single sentence on it, what would it be? What do you wish you could relay to people without necessarily having to talk to them or to announce it when you enter a room? And this journaling prompt is helpful because I think for the most part, for so many of us, grief feels invisible. It's something we carry without other people knowing. There's that quote that goes around that's like, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle, but that's really easy to forget. I'll tell you, I walk around in the world as a grief coach, oftentimes feeling as if I am the only one fighting a hard battle. Those are on my worst days. On my best days, I look around the grocery store and recognize they're fighting a battle, they're fighting a battle, he's fighting a battle, she's fighting a battle, they're fighting a battle. I am able to have that posture and that outlook on the world. But a lot of times, especially when I am deep in my own grief, I feel as if I'm the only one who's mourning. And something that helps me begin to put words to why and how that's painful and what I want to do next is a really good invitation. It's a really good practice to say the thing no one sees is, and then insert whatever it is you feel like no one's seeing or noticing about you right now. Number 5 is another one of my favorites and kind of similarly related to the thing no one sees is, but it's what are you seeing? What's the view from your window right now? It's a small thing that brought me comfort today was. And this, let me tell you, speaking of asterisks, we got to bring in another one here because this one ain't about gratitude. Gratitude is such an insult when you're grieving. I am not interested in being grateful for my life because a lot of times in grief and loss, we do not ask for our circumstances. We do not ask for whatever befell us or whatever stormed through our lives and stole so much from us. We do not wish for that, and we do not have a thankfulness in our hearts for it being what is being served on our plate right now. I ain't saying a blessing before eating that. To bring out a little of my Southern right now, I am not saying a blessing before being forced to eat that right now. Instead of gratitude, something that you can shift your perspective towards softly, as Martha Beck says, turning the boat by 1 degree or turning the plane by 1 degree, eventually you'll end up in a different location than where you originally set out for. Turning just by 1 degree, swiveling by 1 degree from gratitude to comfort is really, really helpful in your grieving because I do not want or need you to be thankful for what happened in your loss. What you can do is notice what's bringing you comfort today and in this moment. You do not have to look at everything that's happened and saying, I'm so grateful to be alive. You may not be. You may not be. And that's a very, very real experience in life after loss. What you can do is notice this small, teeny tiny thing brought me comfort today. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm experiencing. This could be, for so many grievers that I speak to, these are things in nature. This could be birdsong. This could be a piece of art. It could also be the ways that you're communicating with other people. So text from your friend or a kind acknowledgement from your boss, maybe. Could be a warm scarf, an article of clothing. Sometimes tactile things are really comforting to us. Sunrises, again, going back to my morning person, maybe you're a sunset person, or maybe you're a moon and stars person. Maybe you're like, I'm not interested in the sun. I am interested in the nighttime. But maybe those are things that are comforting to you. I've got a warm cup of tea here. Maybe it's a warm cup of tea. Maybe it's something you ate. Fresh pastry, that could be a comforting thing as well. Maybe it's something you didn't have to do today. That can be comforting. Maybe it's something that you got to do today. That can also be comforting. I know that for a lot of grieving people, nature is something that they turn to. And I also know for a lot of grieving people, nature is something that is a reminder that time keeps going. Whether the leaves are falling off the trees or the crocuses are popping up in the springtime, nature can be a reminder that time keeps going. And again, if you shift that perspective of time keeps going to, I am noticing things that are beautiful about time keeping going, that is another way to find comfort in grief. Again, not gratitude, but comfort. In 2020, on Mother's Day, I did an interview with Cheryl Strayed in partnership with Alicia Forneray for Motherless Mother's Day. It was like a long weekend of Mother's Day events for grieving people. And Cheryl talked about being 20 years out from her mom, Bobby's death. And her mom's death was the reason, or part of the inspiration, she wrote her memoir, Wild. And she shared the wisdom that her mom gave her in life, which is to put yourself in the way of beauty. And it points to purposely making decisions or choices that put you in spaces and places and in communities and environments where beauty is already happening. And I love this because no more work is required of you other than the intention to be beside beauty. The beauty will happen whether you're there or not. But to put yourself there, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, and then to notice it, is a much smaller ask than produce beauty while you're grieving. That's a big, big ask when you're grieving. But to put yourself in the way of beauty and then to notice it is a really, really beautiful and much easier energetically practice when you're grieving. You don't have to expend so much to try to get there. And so you could say with this prompt, a small thing that brought me comfort today was, or you could certainly say, this kind of a bonus prompt for you, a small thing that was beautiful today was. And this beautiful thing does not have to be forced into being by you. You don't have to make it with your own two hands. It can be something that you are appreciating as beautiful for the sake of it existing in the world. Yeah. Okay. Number 6. What I wish I could say to them, to myself, to the world is. This is similar to the prompt we did previously on what no one sees is, but this gives you a little bit of your power back. What I wish I could say to them is, if I had the words for this, or if I could have the autonomy to announce this out loud, I would say, because a lot of times when we're grieving, we have a lot that we want to say and we have a lot that we want to express, and all of that takes up space. That takes up energy. A lot of times, grieving people will say, I feel so anxious, or I'm ruminating on saying this over and over again, or I want my boss to know this, or my friends to know this, or my family to know this. And writing down the words that you want to say, even if you have no intention of ever saying them, without judgment and without editing yourself, because no one will ever see these, can be really helpful and really cathartic. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else but you. Even if it makes no sense to you, that's okay too. And it doesn't have to be nice either. And that's a big old permission slip that a lot of people need when they're grieving, especially people who were raised as women, because we are socialized to not feel things like anger or rage or criticism or judgment. That is for stereotypically men to have. Women are told that their best expressions of grief, or their preferred expressions of grief in society, are things like tears, are things like kind of hiding away, or preparing food for others, or taking some sort of philanthropic action, starting a charity, making blankets for people. Absolutely wonderful things to do when you're grieving. But things like anger, things like boundary setting, things like feeling rage over something, things like wanting to blow up, for lack of better phrasing, at the people or the institutions or the structures and the systems in our lives is not acceptable. But I will say that sometimes, to this prompt, what I wish I could say is, sometimes your angriest or most instinctual thoughts, like your knee-jerk sentence that you could say to anybody right now, could be an indicator of something that you value deeply. In Life After Loss Academy, we talk about often the underbelly of anger is having values, is having things that you value deeply. For instance, if your relationship broke up because you were cheated upon, maybe, and you're angry about that, understandably, maybe you value loyalty or communication or clarity about what this relationship is, where it's going, and how it's being defined, and you didn't get those things. And that's more than fine to feel rage or anger about that. And the underside of being angry about something is oftentimes you value what it is that you're angry about. So, for example, if what you write down is, what I wish I could say is, to my friends, why the hell aren't you reaching out? It's been 6 months. My dad's still dead. Why don't you care anymore? Why are you acting like everything has gone back to normal? Why are you planning our friendship vacation and not acknowledging all the ways that this is going to change my life? That could be an indication that you deeply value your friendships and you still want to be friends with these people, but also that you are aching to connect and to feel supported still in your grief. You deeply value friendships and relationships that allow your grief to come along for the ride. And I will say, in this prompt, I'm not asking you to do anything with this information. Just simply recognizing what you're angry about can help you take next steps when you're ready. I had a student in Life After Loss Academy named Julia, and she wrote about being frustrated with her bosses who had like absolutely no flexibility when it came to her grieving her father who had just died, and then also taking care of being her mother's primary caregiver. And her mom had dementia. She was living in a care home during the height of COVID. And so figuring out how to access her, figuring out things with medication and timing, and were they locked down? Were they open and available to visit? How far away was everything? What kind of care was she receiving? What kind of testing was going on? There are many, many questions happening. And as the sole point person of that, and also as somebody with a full-time job, her workplace did not know what to do with her. And she recognized by writing about it that this job is not a sustainable fit in the long term. This is not an okay place for my grief to live permanently. And she ended up, again, over time, not in the instant she journaled about it, but gradually over months, she ended up leaving this job and then getting another one at a tea shop with two other women who were grievers, who were widows, and they understood what it was like to be grieving and to need to be working people at the same time. And she came back to the group and she told me in an email, a private email months later, she's like, I have never been happier. I get to participate in one of my favorite hobbies as a job, which is drinking tea. But then I'm surrounded by people who know what it is to have grief and work in the same location. And that is something that exists. I didn't think that was something I could get for myself, but by journaling of what I wish I could say is to them, to myself, to the world, she started to really put the pieces together of this is unsustainable for me and my grief. And I could begin to have some sort of power here in shifting how this goes in the future. It's a really wonderful story. It's one of my favorites from the group. Lastly, number 7, journaling prompt for a blank page. If my goal in grief isn't getting over it, maybe it's insert your words here. And you've listened to Grief Grower now for 2 full episodes, 1 trailer and 2 full episodes. So you know that around these parts, we don't believe in getting over grief. There's no such thing as getting over grief. Like it's an obstacle you can just hurdle and hurl your body over. That might be society's goal for you. It might even be your friend and family's goal for you. It might be your boss's goal for you. It might be someone else's goal for you. But it doesn't have to be yours. This prompt is all about, kind of like the last one, reclaiming power in grief to define what healing means to you and set goals in grief for yourself. So if getting over it, heavy air quotes, you can see me on YouTube, heavy air quotes. For instance, forgetting your losses, leaving grief in the past, never speaking about your person's name if you lost a loved one or a breakup relationship, pretending nothing's happened. If none of that is your goal, what is? What is your goal? You might consider goals that you would set for this week. You might consider goals you might set for this month. You might consider goals you'd set for this year. If you're interested in thinking about a whole year from now, where would you like to be? How would you like to feel? What would you like your life to look like? There's an article I wrote over on my blog. You can find it for free, shelbyforsythia.com/blog, about setting New Year's resolutions, goals around the new year, and tying grief into your resolutions. I know it's not New Year's year round, but if you'd like some even deeper tips on setting goals for the new year and beyond, it's a really, really good and free place to start. And there's a bunch of different ideas for setting goals as it pertains to your grief, because I'll tell you what, grief changes how we set goals in the aftermath of loss. It demands that we do things differently, for sure. Oftentimes we have different priorities. Oftentimes we have different motivations. Oftentimes we're forced into different timelines or different tools or resources that we have to work with. Sometimes we have less money. Sometimes we have more money. Sometimes we have more time. Sometimes we have less time. Sometimes we have a team of people around us. And sometimes the losses we've faced mean that we don't have anyone. And so we're working towards goals under totally different circumstances than we had before. Sometimes we have lots of energy. Sometimes we have none. There are just so many different ways that grief fiddles with how we're trying to move forward that we know for certain that getting over grief is not the goal. That gives us a lot of other options for what could be the goal in the future. And if you're not entirely set on coming up with clear and distinct goals, frame all of them with maybe. That word maybe in this journaling prompt does a lot of heavy lifting. If my goal isn't getting over it, maybe it's blank. Brainstorm. This is not the 10 Commandments. This is not the tome of your life. This is not going to be a published work. You can use this to list all of the possibilities, all the considerations, all of the potentials that you might like to live in, all the alternate realities that you might like to be true for your life with grief. If my goal isn't getting over grief and I have to live with it forever, maybe my goal is insert something here. I want to offer you some takeaway things as we close out this podcast episode. I hope that if grief feels like you don't have words for it yet, that journaling about grief and these 7 prompts, or whichever one or two or three or four resonate with you, serve as a really good place to start. I want you to know, as I wrote in my book, Your Grief Your Way, you get to do grief your way. You don't have to write every day. You don't have to be poetic or rational or logical in your writing. You don't even have to finish a prompt. You can stop in the middle of a sentence. And I know for so many perfectionists out there in the world, I'm looking at you, hello, recovering perfectionist here, that can feel so sacrilegious or so um, unsettling. And it can be another way you look at yourself and you're like, wow, grief has made it so I can't even finish a sentence either. Take a breath and let it be true. Just start journaling about your grief, with your grief in tow, alongside your grief, however you'd like to picture your grief in the room as you write. And I know for whatever this means to you and however it shows up in your life, your grief will thank you. You will come away having expressed something you haven't expressed before, having learned something maybe you didn't know before, and maybe even most helpfully putting words to something or a definition around something that you didn't have words or definition to before. And that is so helpful when you're grieving at a time when everything feels like blobby and amorphous and ambiguous and uncertain, to lasso words around it and tie it down, even if just for the moment that you're journaling, even if just for the moment that you're writing. In this moment, it feels like clunk. In this season, I wish I could say clunk. I wish someone would know about me clunk. These are all very certain, definite things, even if they only exist in the moment, that can really feel like a blessing in grief. And your journal can act not only as a mirror that you're holding up to yourself, but again, like a container, like a living room, stretch out, take up the space, get some throw pillows, it's yours, but also a witness and a diary and a log of this season of your life. You can look back on past journaling entries. I've definitely done this for myself and been like, wow, that's where I was. Not with shame or not with um, distress or cringiness or judgment, but just like, wow, that was what I was focused on then. That was what felt important. That was the biggest struggle. That felt like the biggest comfort, going back to that prompt of what feels comforting right now in this season. And then having that change 3, 6, 9, 12 months later. Isn't that interesting how that's changed over time? Journaling can be that for you. Journals can be a place in grief where nothing has to make sense. Everything is allowed, which is my favorite part. And it just kind of like people putting their initials on trees or attaching locks to bridges. It's like I was here. I was working through something. I was working out something. I was living through something. And that is really significant and really affirming and grounding and kind of rooting you back into the earth when you're grieving, which is a time when so many of us feel detached from what it means to be alive and here on earth. And as always, I will say too, if you like journaling about grief, if you want exercises even more about seeing grief differently or reframing where you are in the world right now, or releasing emotions that you're not necessarily sure what to do with, or wrapping language around things that don't have words for you in this moment, I really encourage you, as always, to join us in Life After Loss Academy. It is open year round because grief is always happening. um, and right now, there are me and dozens of students in there who are standing by and working through lessons on our own time at our own pace and coming together every week to talk about what we're learning, how we're growing, in what directions we're growing, because sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're different. Honoring milestones together, which is such a biggie, and ultimately over and over and over again, finding and refinding the words, the metaphors, the language, the visualizations to describe what the heck is going on when we're grieving. All losses are welcome, all timelines, all years, months, decades it's been since your loss are welcome. And once you're in the course, you are in it for life. It's not something that expires, which is by design, because if future stuff comes up with regard to an old loss, I want you to be able to have support for that. And sadly, as new losses appear, as they have in my own life too, I want you to also have support from me and other people who know what it is to grieve. And you can find out more information about that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for joining me today, Grief Growers. I am so, so glad to have been here with you. Get your pens, get your journals, and let's get to writing about grief. And I would love to know what you learned. I hope you'll find me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, Threads, wherever you want to find me, and tell me what you're writing about if you'd like to share. That's all for this episode of Grief Grower. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're looking for grief support beyond this show, you can find free workshops and blog articles like I mentioned, and my signature What's Your Grief Support Style quiz at shelbyforsythia.com/links, and you can find that in the show notes. If today's podcast felt comforting, educational, or otherwise helpful to you as you walk through grief, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And be sure to share Grief Grower with a friend, because you never know what someone you love is going through. A huge thank you to the Grief Growers community for supporting the show on Patreon. If you'd like to join them and help me keep the show free from ads, because life is hard enough and grief is hard enough without commercials, head to patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. As a Patreon supporter, you get to help me choose new topics and guests for the show, and you're the first to get behind-the-scenes access to everything that I'm creating, like my new book, which is coming out in 2026. Grief Grower is hosted by me, Shelby Forsythia, and the theme music is composed by Addie Goldstein. Until next time, I see you. I am so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world, and I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.